online very shortly. But before that, with the COVID inquiry starting this week to learn lessons from the past, it would be easy to assume, wouldn't it, the pandemic's behind us. But with an estimated 2% of the population in Wales reporting they still have COVID symptoms a year after diagnosis. For many, COVID-19 clearly is far from over. Among them, Gareth Evans from Cwmbran, who caught coronavirus in 2020 and has long COVID. Good morning, Gareth.
Good morning, Ollie.
Well, how are you feeling now then? How is long COVID presenting with you?
Well, at the moment, I feel quite lucky that I've been able to recover somewhat. I still have some lingering symptoms, which I'm doing my best to manage. But overall, I'm doing okay, thanks.
Okay, so what are your lingering symptoms?
So the main issues I have at the moment relate to my sleep. So I've had chronic insomnia, and I'm sort of using, any techniques possible, really, like medication or meditation to try and to manage that. I still have tinnitus, and although I'm doing some level of exercise, I'm really struggling to get back to the levels of fitness that I had prior to COVID.
And this is all confirmed, is it? That there is a diagnosis here that links all of this to COVID?
To be honest, I've never had an official diagnosis. The trouble is that there's no diagnostic test for long COVID. They refer to it as a diagnosis by exclusion, so they have to rule out other conditions before they can even think about coming up with a diagnosis. And I think that's the issue with a lot of long COVID sufferers is getting that validation that they're actually ill.
Yeah. So if that's the option for you, have you done that? Have you been through all of that and had everything else ruled out?
I guess I'm still in that process. Over the last 3 years, I've had numerous appointments with various specialists. I've had pretty much every test you can think of. More often than not, they come back normal. I think, although long COVID is still misunderstood, and like I say, there's no test for it, so it's hard to get that diagnosis. I think, doctors generally are coming around to the idea that there is such a thing as long COVID. So I know dealing with my doctors at the moment, they acknowledge the fact that there is such a thing as long COVID, but in terms of coming up with a way to treat it or test it or find a cure, I think we're some way off yet.
Yeah, and do you think that if you were on the other side of the border, if you were in England, things would be different?
Well, in England, they have specialised clinics set up to refer people to where they can get all the access to the various tests that I think would could rule out any sort of life-threatening condition that could be caused by the damage caused by long COVID, and to give you that peace of mind. The way it's set up in Wales at the moment, that you refer yourself to your local GP and they refer you to the relevant specialist. But in my case, because long COVID is a multidisciplinary illness, and there's so many symptoms that present themselves that it affects all of your organs, your brain, your heart, your lungs, your nervous system. So in my case, it was a case of being referred to one specialist, and given the strain that the NHS is under at the moment, I had to wait some time to get that appointment. And more often than not, the test would come back normal, and then I had to go back to my GP to be referred to another specialist. So I was going through this process, and I know it's common with a lot of other chronic illnesses, and trying to get that diagnosis, that it can take a number of years before you can even get a diagnosis.
Yeah, and all the while, I should imagine this has clearly it's having a physical effect on you, but also I think probably psychologically, mentally, you must feel the strain, Gareth.
I'll be honest. The strain that not only me, but my friends and family were under was enormous. Particularly because I fell ill during the early stages of the pandemic, and nobody knew anything about it. PCR testing wasn't available to the general public at the time, so I couldn't get a positive test to prove that I had COVID. I've never had a cough, but I had all these other symptoms that would suggest that there was an issue, and trying to get that validation that I was even ill, from the doctors during the early stages of the pandemic was really difficult. Because
this was what, spring 2020, was it? This was before It was April 2020, so very early days before testing was up and running.
Yeah, that's right. And at the time, we all thought that COVID was a respiratory illness. But I think over time, we began to learn more and more about COVID and long COVID. So yeah, trying to get that validation that I was ill. I mean, I went to hospital for 2 nights under observation. I had all the tests done, but because they couldn't find anything really wrong with me, or based on their tests at the moment, that I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and I was discharged. And I think this is common with a lot of people with long COVID, is they're struggling to get any sort of meaningful diagnosis that they can go about treating this.
Yeah.
And especially with doctors suggesting if you've got anxiety and depression that you need to get out and do more exercise. That's the worst advice you can give to someone with long COVID, because any sort of physical, mental exertion can serve to make them worse.
It's tough. It's tough, Gareth.
Yeah.
It's tough. Gareth, thank you so much. Thanks for talking to us this morning. We wish you all the best. And the Welsh Government spokesperson said all health boards in Wales are providing an individual tailored approach to supporting and treating people with long COVID. For those who require more specialist support, which is only available from hospital-based services, they'll be referred via their GP or healthcare professional. And we've increased funding for recovery services to £8.3 million on an ongoing basis to enable health boards to sustainably build these services further. So the papers.